Hi everybody, Dr. Britt Talley Daniel MD, and I'm a neurologist and headache doctor. Today I'm talking about the biologic clock, which is the circadian rhythm and cluster headache. Located deep in the center of the brain is the pineal gland, which is called the biologic clock. The pineal gland secretes melatonin, a brain neurochemical that helps regulate the human biologic clock, and which provides a so-called circadian rhythm. So the biologic clock, circadian rhythm, and cluster headache are intimately related, as cluster headaches occur at the same time in the 24-hour cycle and often at the same time as the yearly seasonal cycle. Cluster headaches come on commonly 1 to 2 hours after going to sleep at night. So for a person to go to bed around 10 p.m., the cluster headache may wake him up, this afflicted individual, about midnight with his usual one-sided severe pain headache associated with autonomic symptoms. Cluster headaches start in the same time of the year, such as in the spring in April or May, for many persons every year. What determines the amount of melatonin the brain makes? Well, the amount of light a human brain is exposed to determines the amount of melatonin produced. What does the word circadian mean, or where does it come from? It comes from the Latin circa, C-I-R-C-A, which means around or approximately. What is the circadian rhythm? Well, that's a natural internal process that sets the sleep-wake cycle. The cycle repeats approximately every 24 hours and is important for general health. It drives internal physiological processes, the internal organs, and the brain. Circadian rhythms are endogenous, which means they're kind of built-in or set to a person's environment by external cues called Zeitgebers. And that's from the German Timegeber. It's spelled Z-E-I-T-G-E-B-E-R-S. And Zeitgebers are light and temperature. What's the anatomical location of the circadian system? The system is controlled by the suprachiasmatic nuclei in the bilateral structure at the base of the brain, the anterior hypothalamus in the brainstem. What are the circadian medical problems? In medical science, an abnormal circadian rhythm in humans is known as circadian rhythm disorder. And examples of circadian rhythm disorder are jet lag, shift work disorder, altered sleep phase disorder, depression, and mood disorders such as bipolar disorder. What's the literature linking cluster headache to the circadian rhythm? Britt et al. Published an article in JAMA Neurology in 2018 entitled "Cluster Headache is in part a disorder of the circadian system." These doctors said the daily rhythmicity or circadian pattern of cluster headache is a fascinating part of the disease. For example, a cluster headache patient from our clinic who's being interviewed about his headache attack stopped and said quite confidently, "I get a headache every day at 11 o'clock and right now it's 10:45. If you wait another 15 minutes, I'll show you what my headache looks like." He had an attack at 11:38 a.m. After further discussion, aided by his headache diary, it was clear that he could routinely predict his attacks within the hour. On a larger scale, a survey of 1,134 cluster headache patients found that 82% had headaches at more or less the same time every day. That's how it plugs into the sleep-wake cycle. In that survey, patients with episodic cluster headache were more likely to have headaches at the same time every year, usually in spring and autumn. Therefore, the circadian system clearly appears to be involved in cluster headache. In this article, we present several preliminary lines of evidence that the circadian system may be abnormal in patients with cluster headaches. Further investigation into these circadian abnormalities may be important in elucidating the full causative mechanism of this disorder and developing treatments of the disease of cluster headache. Pringheim wrote an article in Review of Canadian Journal Neurology in Science in 2002 entitled "Cluster Headache, Evidence for a Disorder of Circadian Rhythm and Hypothalamic Function." This article reviews the literature for evidence of a disorder of circadian rhythm and hypothalamic function in cluster headaches. Cluster headache exhibits diurnal and seasonal rhythmicity. While cluster headache has traditionally been thought of as a vascular headache disorder, this is an old article, now it's not thought that way, its periodicity suggests involvement of the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the hypothalamus, the so-called biologic clock. Normal circadian function and seasonal changes occurring in the suprachiasmatic nucleus and pineal gland are correlated to the clinical features and abnormalities of circadian rhythm seen in cluster headache. Abnormalities in the secretion of melatonin and cortisol in patients with cluster headache, neuroimaging of the cluster headache patient attacks, and the use of melatonin as preventative therapy of cluster headache are all discussed in this review. While the majority of studies exploring the relationship between circadian rhythms and cluster headaches are not new, we have entered a new diagnostic and therapeutic era in primary headache disorders. The time has come to use the evidence for a disorder of circadian rhythm. Cluster headache to further development of chronobiotics in the treatment of this disorder. Abstract circadian rhythms of physiology are key to health and fitness, as dysregulation by the genetic mutations or environmental factors increases disease risk and aggravates progression. Molecular and physiological studies have shed important light on an intrinsic clock that drives circadian rhythms and serves essential roles in metabolic homeostasis, organ physiology, and brain functions. One exciting new area in circadian research is pain, including headache and neuropathic pain, for which new mechanistic insights have recently emerged. For example, cluster headache is an intermittent pain disorder with exceedingly precise circadian timing, and preliminary evidence is emerging linking several circadian components with the disease. In this review, we first discussed the broad metabolic and physiologic relevance of the circadian timing system. We then provide a detailed review of the circadian relevance in pain disease and physiology, including cluster headache, migraine, hypnic headache, and neuropathic pain. Finally, we described potential therapeutic implications, including existing pain medicines and novel clock modulating compounds. The physiologic basis of the circadian rhythms in pain is an exciting new area of research with profound basic and translational impact. Last article. Dr. Neighbor et al., a group of others in Cephalgia of 2019, wrote an article on the biologic clock in cluster headache, a review and hypothesis. Cluster headache attacks are believed to be modulated in the hypothalamus. Moreover, the severe pain and typical autonomic cranial features associated with cluster headache are caused by abnormal activity of the trigeminal autonomic reflex. The temporal pattern of cluster headache attacks suggests involvements of the biologic clock, and the seasonal pattern is influenced by the number of daylight hours. Although sleep is often reported as a trigger for cluster headache attacks, to date, no clear correlation has been established between these attacks and sleep stage. Normally, they're in neurology learning there are 4 stages of sleep. Conclusions. We hypothesize that light sleep and the biologic clock can change the brain state, thereby lowering the threshold for activating the trigeminal autonomic reflex, resulting in a cluster headache attack. Understanding the mechanisms that contribute to the daily and seasonal fluctuations of cluster headache attacks may provide new therapeutic targets. So it's the end of my discussion on this subject regarding your biologic clock and cluster headache. Thanks for listening to it and watching me. Click on subscribe down there so we can follow each other. God bless all you persons who have cluster headache, clearly the worst headache in the world, and I will see you on the next talk.